Now, it's almost been a year since Blackmagic announced the Pyxis, and I thought it was a good enough camera that I switched my Red Komodo X for it, which might have been a little bit annoying for some people. But they also added some other cameras to the lineup as well. They added the Ursa 17K, which is going to be a 65mm IMAX replacement killer. I don't really know what it is, but one camera I want to talk about today is going to be the Ursa 12K. Now, this is an affordable price as far as cinema cameras in that lineup goes, and they also announced a kind of price reduction by giving it a body-only option, which I think is a worthwhile camera to look into in 2025. Now, I also want to add in, I have one, but it's not exactly mine. I got to borrow it for the last couple of weeks to do some test shoots and as well as commercial with Trish Stratus from the WWE. We'll get to that a little bit later, but I want to talk about my experience and the workflow of the Ursa 12K. We'll get there. Now, as far as disclosures go, Blackmagic didn't give me this camera to keep. I got to use it on the set. I didn't have to pay for the rental, but by the time you're watching this video, it's already shipped to the next person for them to be able to use it. Also, spoiler alert for this video, I fully intend on maybe getting one of these one day for my production camera for some of the commercial work I have to do, because it's an absolute beast. But let's talk about some of the workflow. Now, this is the more stripped down version of this camera. I took the battery off, took the lens off, took off some of the accessories because I don't need them on right now as I'm transferring footage. But like the Wu-Tang Clan, this camera is nothing to, you know the rest of the line. This camera packs out to be a pretty big camera when you get it going. If you're looking for a Sony FX3 type of lightness, you're not gonna find it here. There's a lot of things going on this camera body. It has a built-in screen. Actually, it has two built-in screens, so you can't complain because it has one on either side. You also get the ability to use the viewfinder that's on this, which is really nice. It does have SDI ports and all the other stuff that you already know about the Ursa 12K body. But one thing I want to mention is while we were shooting, this is very much more of a sticks camera, something you put on an easy rig, maybe on a bigger Dana dolly. This is definitely not something that's going to fit on your RS4 Pro. It's definitely not something that's going to fit on a handheld gimbal. And I definitely wouldn't do handheld with this guy fully rigged out by itself. I tried that with the Venice one time and I was out for 3 days, and I'm not going to make the same mistake twice. Basically, what I'm trying to say, if you do get this guy in your workflow, one thing you might want to do is either go to the gym a lot or have accessories to help support you, or preferably just do both. Do both. Now, it's also in the name that the Ursa 12K is, well, 12K. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to shoot in 12K. In fact, I don't think I did for the majority of the shoots that I did do. Now, 12K, 8K, that 9K, and also 4K as well are very high resolution modes, although you do crop in when you use it at 9K. But one of the things about the sensor isn't necessarily its maximum resolution, but the fact that you can get information when you downsample it without losing or cropping in on the sensor. So most of the things that I shot in were going to be in 4K or in 8K, but what that does is it takes from that 12K and downsamples it back. There's a bunch of technological mumbo jumbo babble stuff that actually makes the 4K cameras that are around right now actually 2.8K or something a little bit lower, mostly because they're Bayard sensors or something like that. Someone will correct me in the comments down below, but like 4K sensors, some of them aren't actually 4K. It's the dimension that's around the sensor, but it's not necessarily the resolution with inside of that. That's the most I got for you. But one thing I do want to mention that there is a lot of detail and a heck of a lot of quality in all of the shooting modes. You also get some S&Q options depending on what you want to go to in your resolution, and the fact that you don't actually have to crop down on those things whenever I need them, I don't feel like I'm missing anything. Now, the Ursa Cine 12K has one of the best dynamic ranges across pretty much every single camera, right up to an ARRI camera. I think it's just a little bit below it. Now, to be completely honest, when someone tells me there's 14 stops of dynamic range, I don't actually know what that means because I can't look at a scene and know exactly how many stops of dynamic range it's going to take up. And I actually don't think anybody can do that at the same time. But one thing that I can say is that the flexibility that you get in some of the files on here, even in my testing, even when I use this on the Trish Stratus shoot, it actually was quite surprising. Now, one of the things I'm usually worried about is when shooting with darker skin tones and getting that recovery back, especially if I get my white balance or my exposure off. Now, I shot a couple of things in the S&Q modes and the off-speed modes on the Ursa 12K, and generally speaking, if you're shooting at 180 degrees, what'll end up happening is that things are going to get a little bit darker. Now, you are going to be working with B-RAW because that's the only option on this camera. Okay, we're going to pause right here for just 1 second, because one thing that I want to talk about is how to reduce or use noise reduction while using the Ursa 12K, because you do get a lot of the information back, but you are still going to get a little bit of noise if you don't expose things completely perfectly in camera. Now, if you look over here, you are going to get a lot of that detail back. Things don't look super mushy, but if you zoom in real small, which you can do because we're shooting in 8K, you're going to notice a little bit of chroma noise into here, a little bit of lumen noise into here, but also keep in mind while you're shooting in RAW, you're going to get noise regardless because there isn't any noise reduction on when you are shooting in RAW, whether it be Red Code RAW, whether it be Blackmagic RAW, or even ProRes RAW as well. Now, one thing that I usually do is I go to my noise reduction and I'll go to like 3, I'll put this to better,
and I may just play around with this guy to see if I can get some of that noise out. Now, something that I realized in DaVinci Resolve in this version of it is that you have something called Ultra Noise Reduction. Now, what it's going to do once I open this guy up is I should just click like Analyze, and it should give me a little box that's going to be over here. I can expand that box, and what I do is I actually drag that over, and because I'm working with an M2 Max and I'm shooting on DaVinci Resolve Cloud, or I'm editing on DaVinci Resolve Cloud, this is going to take a little bit. Okay, now that it's over here to where the noise is going to be, I'm still getting that spinning beach bubble. What you're going to see is if you go down to the analyze part of this guy, it actually tells you how much luma and chroma noise reduction you actually need. In fact, I'm going to try turning this guy off and just see if that changes anything at all. Maybe I'll get some better performance because my computer gets really slow when I try to put noise reduction on 8K footage. But just keep in mind while working with the Ursa Cine 12K, yes, you could bring up a lot of details,
but one thing that I really did like was the ability to recover shadow information. In fact, during the shoot that we're going to talk about a little bit later, on the Trish Stratus shoot, one of the things that we were given were some notes on the lighting. They didn't want things to be overly moody. They kind of wanted a more cleaner and commercial look. Now that's something that I absolutely can do, but there are some parts of that shoot where I might have went a little bit too much on the contrast, and there was some darker shadows and kind of rolled off a little bit, typically to my normal style. At first it caused a little bit of a panic for me when I put this on DaVinci Resolve, but I did realize that because you can recover so much information, I can make that contrast ratio look a little bit more to what I want it to, or at least what I was asked to in the first place. This is a great way to be able to adjust things in post and get a lot of information in order to recover it. But one thing I'm going to mention is you still have to pay the cost to be the boss, which we'll talk about after we talk about the shoots that we did and some of the caveats that we have using the Ursa 12K. Now, some of you guys are going to ask about some of the subject matter in terms of what we actually shot. Now, again, this isn't a super scientific test. I think CVP does a way better job than I did, but I wanted to contextualize some of the information in order for me to kind of get a gist of what actually ends up happening. For one, we're going to talk a little bit about the dynamic range, and one thing I wanted to try was a room that was all white with windows while it was snowing, and see if I could pull some of the highlight information back.
feature that a little bit of context. So what I'm going to do here is I do have this all white room. There, you can actually see the information that's going to be in these windows here. There's not a lot of stuff I need to do if I want to expose for those windows, but at the same time, if you zoom into here, most of my subject is going to be in shadow. Now, I've already done the HDR adjustments, and I think I'll already put them on the screen in a text box. But when I go over to here, these are going to be some of the settings. I brought my shadows up by 0.87, my light down by 0.58, and I'm just going to see what this looks like when it's on and when it's off. Now, once I turn this guy back on, things look a little bit weird and HDR-y. Now, I can change these things up, but I can find a lot of information in there. If I turn that guy off, all of that was gone. Once you've turned that back on, you can get a lot of that back. And just recently in this video, and just before this in this video, we did talk about being able to use noise reduction in order to bring back some, or at least get rid of some of that noise that might be in there. I'm just going to open up a noise reduction node right now. We're going to see my computer chug again. So let's just give me a second here. I'm going to go to Analyze. Tell me where the bullies are. Put it like right about here because that's probably where the noise is going to be. And then you're going to have your noise reduction do its thing. Now, the fact that you could bring back a lot of this information, this looks very HDR-y, and I would probably do a lot more finessing to get this to work. The fact that you can still expose for your shadows, or at least you could bring this shadow detail up while at the same time having this back here without an incredible amount of muddiness gonna go on over here, is really, really cool. Now, I am gonna clips here, and this one's going to be the Pyxis right on this side, and this one's going to be the Ursa. Now, if you notice between these two, if I just kind of like go over here, select this guy, and put them side by side in full screen. They don't look exactly the same coming right at the camera, but then again, even RE cameras, if you get two of them together, they might not look exactly the same when you put on the same grade. But regardless, that's beside the point. Now, when we get back over to here, we're just going to make a dynamic scene. I have something in my foreground, which is usually going to be in the shadows. I'm going to try to expose for the windows. I'm at the base ISOs on both cameras, and I've equated my ND filters to make sure that these guys make sense. Also, now that I think about it, I think the reason why this one doesn't look the same is because we used a Peter McKinnon filter on it. But anyways, nor here nor there. Now, one thing I will say is that the Pyxis does have less dynamic range than the Ursa 12K. One thing I'm also going to say at the same time is, does that really matter in a scene like this? Generally speaking, if you have your subject or something in the foreground and that's going to be properly exposed, that's over here with something in the window, if I expose for the windows, if I can see that little bit of house in here, I can see the sky saturation, well, then I definitely can see this. This is definitely more than a usable shot. And this is on something with almost 2 stops less, well, than this guy. Let me just kind of let this go over there. Well, then the Ursa. Now, if you put these two side by side, if I make that little side by side thing again, yeah, you're going to have more saturation in the sky. That might be a factor of having a little bit more dynamic range on the Ursa 12K. However, the Pyxis is no slouch, and generally speaking, when we're splitting hairs between most things past 10, 11 stops, I don't know if we're actually using all of them anyways to make such an argument to be upset about. What I'm trying to say here, both are great. Both can match up very well. The Ursa does have more dynamic range. I don't really know if it's a factor or anything, but you can see like even the kind of little sliver of light on the side of the cup versus not being able to see it here. Sun moved a little bit, but again, if I go super deep into comparing these two in an A and B situation, I'll drive myself crazy. But the key thing is, they both look good. And so you thought you were going to escape a video with Uncle Kofi, but today we are going to do 3 Ghanaian words of the day. Today we are going to do bra, kwo, and yenkwo. So bra will mean when I want you to come here. So if I say Kofi bra, that means I want you to go from wherever you are, I want you to come here. If I say kwo, that means I am finished with you. I want you to kwo, you have to go. Now, when I want to go somewhere together, we will say yenkwo, yenkwo. So in context, I want to tell you this one. I want you to brag to this YouTube channel. I want you to quote to the subscribe button and yen quote to the rest of this video. See how that works? This is funny. Okay, so secondary example here, we're gonna actually expose for our windows back here. We're gonna use our HDR node, which basically I just turned up the highlights one and I turned down the shadows, or the other way around. But essentially I added one stop of shadows and down one in highlights so I can expose to the windows. And we're going to put these two side by side. We're going to full screen them and we're going to have a look. Now, I mentioned this before, I'm going to mention this later. You're going to be able to use noise reduction to bring out some of the noise that you might find in your image. I have a noise node on here and I'll see it in the final footage when we show this after. But one thing that I did notice is on the Ursa Cine 12K, even when I brought up the shadows, I still have them pretty clean, even though I'm using 800 ISO, which might maybe be a benefit to the high dynamic range you get on the Ursa Cine 12K. It might be great in the highs, but a little bit better on the Ursa in the lows. Where on the Pyxis, it's no slouch. I can do a bunch of adjustments to try to make these a little bit more black and contrasty, but if you see the darker areas, it kind of has a more faded look to it, which might mean that there might be some missing information that's going to be in those darker areas, but at the same time, again, these are things that you're probably not going to notice if you're seeing these two side by side. Once I put that noise reduction on here, like it's going to be fine. You could use things like curves to bring up your black point to make this one look a little bit better. But at the end of the day, they both look good. But that is to say that I do feel a little bit more comfortable trying to recover shadows out of the Ursa, which we'll show you in a future example, versus doing it on the Pyxis. so this is an example when you compare these two side by side when working on some of the shadow recovery on somebody's skin tones. Now, if I go back and I reset these, maybe I go back to reset this one, you'll see how dark this actually is in practice. I'm gonna put that back up there. So you're gonna see that before and after. Hang on, let me sec. And after. And then if we go into here, I'm gonna kind of minimize this a little bit. And if I do that reset again, so if I reset down here, that's what's gonna look before. If I go to after. Now, that's just me showing you the difference between when you wanna reset these guys. I use the raw tab to adjust these guys at the base ISOs. But one thing you're going to notice when I press this full screen here is this might be a factor of using 8K versus 6K, but you actually get a little bit more detail in some of where that shadow information used to be. Now, on the Pyxis, it's going to be a little bit more noisy, which is kind of just par for the course. Again, the Ursa 12K has more dynamic range, but at the same time, this is kind of a call to maybe use better lighting. Now, if I try to bring back that window, now this is going to be an incredibly extreme example, and I probably wouldn't do it this way, but I'm going to go over this node. I'm going to turn my highlights all the way back down, do it over here as well. Open both these guys up, you're still getting that information back in the brighter ends. You're still maybe going to get a little bit more saturation on the Ursa side of things. Things look a little bit less noisy than it does on the Pyxis, but again, anything that you're going to raise a big issue about, we're kind of fighting ghosts at this point. However, I will say in examples in this video, I feel a little bit more comfortable recovering shadows when working with human subjects, especially when I have lights that might not have been as bright enough, or maybe I just have to change a little bit of the contrast ratio, which actually happened on a shoot. I feel a little bit more comfortable doing it on the Ursa than I do on the Pyxis, as the Pyxis with darker pixels, even in the full frame Cine 6K, didn't do as well, but both hold up pretty decently if I put them side by side.
Another shoot that I did was I decided to go over to my buddy's gym, which I feel like I've gone a lot to test some footage nowadays, and I wanted to see how things looked in terms of action, or normally if I were to shoot in a gym setting. Now, one of the things I did notice in some of these higher end cameras, and this isn't just the Ursa 12K, but it's a lot of other cameras as well, is some of the resolution and some of the quality you get out of these cameras means I could bring less stuff in order to dial in an image. For a lot of the stuff we got in this boxing gym, we only used one light. I had my Nanlite Forza 300 and we used window light, and everything looked really good. And what's also nice, I could push and pull that flexibility in terms of my dynamic range around in order to get the image that I want to. You can still do this in RAW and other cameras like the Pyxis or anything else that shoots in RAW, but I found it just particularly a little bit nicer on the Ursa 12K because you're working with so much dynamic range. Now, the colors in terms of what it's going to look like out of the box, you put this beside a graded image with the Pyxis, they're going to look very similar to each other. I feel like some of the cameras nowadays, what you don't necessarily see is the stuff when you actually see the final product and the finished product. But where the benefits are is what actually happens under the hood and behind the scenes. How much you can push and pull the footage. Can I change my white balance? Can I adjust my dynamic range? Maybe their highlights blown out and I need to bring that back. Maybe I need to reframe things and I need the extra resolution in order to do that. I think for a lot of these cameras, sometimes what we end up worrying about is, can we tell the difference when the final product is out? But that's not necessarily where all of the story is actually going to be told. It's going to be told usually when you're sitting on your computer stressing out at 4 in the morning to make sure that you got every shot that you need looking the way that it needs to. Now we're going to go into a couple of caveats, because what's a video about a camera if we don't have a couple of downsides? Well, we already talked about the fact that this camera is absolutely gigantic. If you fully rig this guy out with BPU batteries, a lens, a matte box, filters, and all the other stuff, you're looking at a pretty heavy rig. Now, if this isn't necessarily the Sony Venice, which I have operated before, and you want to see that video, I'll leave it over here. But it is a bigger camera, which means you're going to have a bigger and a slower workflow. Now, if you use autofocus and you really want an autofocusing camera, you should have clicked off the video time ago, because we already know that the Ursa Cine 12K and also just Blackmagic in general, they don't have autofocusing cameras. Now, neither does Ari, so I think that's kind of a moot point here, but if you are buying this cinema camera, get ready for a cinema type of workflow. But there is one part of the workflow that I'm not too crazy about, and it's how I offload footage on the Ursa 12K to get it onto my computer. Now, I already know what I'm getting into in terms of using gigantic files. I shot a lot of things in 8K, shot a couple files in 10K, but then I also use slow motion as well. And the files are huge. There's no way around it. The files are gigantic. In fact, that Trish Stratus shoot was like 1.4 terabytes, and we effectively shot for like 6 hours. It was a lot of information. But that's not the biggest problem that I have. I could buy hard drives, but one thing that's a little bit of an issue is how you actually get things off of this if you don't have that module reader. Now, this camera does have an 8 terabyte module if you buy the entire kit. But one thing that's going to get really annoying is that if you don't have the reader for it that you have to buy separately, the only way to offload footage on this guy is through the USB ports or Ethernet. Now, if you use it on USB, you can do it. It'll just take you 15 days in order for you to do so. And even if you do it by Ethernet connected to a box, in fact, let me just show you the things that I had to do to get this on here. Okay, so this is an Ethernet cable. It's incredibly long. It's not expensive. It's just really annoying to have to buy. This is a 10G Ethernet that you have to plug into the Ethernet port on the back of the Ursa 12K. Now, that's not even the end of the story here. You have to also get one of these converters as well. This is an Ethernet to a Thunderbolt cable hub, and this one costed a little bit more than what I bargained for just to get memory off of, but it's also a lot cheaper than the S/S cards on the Sony Venice. But the fact that I got to spend an extra couple $100 in order to get this guy, and also I have to get an Ethernet cable, this becomes annoying. On top of that, there's one more piece. Now, you also have to get a Thunderbolt cable as well, and I haven't confirmed whether or not you could use regular USB-Cs, but the fact that they were very specific on Thunderbolt 4, the highest level of Thunderbolt you can get, I'm assuming that's going to impact your upload speeds if you use anything that's going to be slower than one of these cables, which means that in order to get the footage off of here, you have to buy all of this stuff, or you got to buy the card reader on B&H, or you got to buy the module reader, which just comes at another expense. Another weird thing that I realized in the package for the Ursa 12K is that the cable where you plug the camera into for AC power only has half of the cable. I don't know why they did that, but it only has half of the cable. Like that little 3-prong thing that you put in the back on the bottom. I'll just show you it. Because also the batteries are separate as well, and B-mount batteries are kind of expensive. But if you want to plug this guy in, maybe it's a low lift shoot, you don't have to do a lot of handheld or moving around, you can grab one of these guys. Except the cable that goes into here didn't come in the case with the one that I got, so I had to go buy another cable. Now, these might just be a bunch of first world problems. I mean, if you are going to use this camera in the same setup as, say, like a Sony Venice, the accessories are going to be way more expensive. And using the Ursa Cine 12K, it's just kind of a hassle. You have to buy all this stuff, and sometimes when you buy a whole kit for a camera, when it says kit on the actual B&H website, you think that you're pretty much done, you have everything that you need, but there's a couple of other things you have to get. It's just the cable part of the Ethernet stuff is something that's new to me, so it was kind of annoying. Now, also with those transfer speeds going from your Ethernet to the control box to the Thunderbolt cable to your computer to a hard drive, sometimes takes a little bit of time as well. In fact, we're going to go back to that Trish shoot again. It took me about 20 hours in order to upload the 1.4 terabytes from that shoot onto my hard drive. Now, this was kind of an issue, but one thing that you can do is you can download some of your proxies in order to send that to an editor to get things working right away. But if you're looking for a camera that's going to be super quick in the department of transferring footage and even just operating the camera, you might be looking at the wrong guy. Now, this also is probably going to drastically change if you do get that 8 terabyte module, but for a camera that I don't even get to keep, I'm probably not going to do that. Now, with those caveats, flaws, and all, where do I think this is going to fit in my workflow? I still want it. I'm not going to lie to you. I still want it. I think it is a great price point, especially with the body only. You can kind of choose your own adventure. V-mount batteries are a lot smaller than B-mount batteries. So if you do get that V-mount battery plate, you can get your own batteries like the Caleb Pike 212 battery or anything else that you're going to use. Being able to customize your setup at kind of the same entry point as you would on a Komodo X with a much bigger sensor, really, really good readout, a screen that's already built into it, actually, well, 2 screens, and being able to use Blackmagic RAW, free DaVinci Resolve, and all the other stuff. This would be a camera that I guess some people would consider like an endgame camera in terms of production. In fact, I have a bunch of commercial shoots that kind of randomly came up in Q2, and I kind of want to get an Ursa Cine 12K in order to shoot them because most of them are going to be on sticks, but I also want to get the most amount of quality. And as well, if I end up shooting a short film, which we still are planning to do, I'd rather just use that camera that I already have in my kit because it's so close to something that's way more expensive in owning or renting an Arri Alexa. There, I made a bold statement. This camera is very close to owning one of those, albeit it's a lot less money. That being said though, getting to bigger cinema cameras isn't necessarily cheap. There's still other things that you have to do. Now you can pick up the Ursa Cine 12K for $7,000, but that's not necessarily going to give you a camera that's ready to shoot. We went about this in our live stream and in the video itself. There's going to be accessories you still need to buy. You're only going to get the EF mount. You'll have to buy the PL mount separately, the V mount plate separately. But even at that, even if it came to say $10,000, I don't know if there's a camera that offers this much power that's going to be that price point. Now, if you're someone that needs smaller cameras, this doesn't fit in your workflow, I don't know why you came here to begin with. I'm not the person to tell you that this camera is going to be particularly light or fast to use. But if you're somebody that is in that production workflow, you're working with a team, or you just want an option that you could strip this guy down but still keep all the quality that comes into this camera, if you haven't seen any of the footage, it looks really, really good. This might be the thing that you're looking for. And for me, and for my personal use and the things that I have to do going in the future, it makes a ton of sense. Now, does that mean I'm going to sell everything and buy the Ursa Cine 12K? Like, probably not. However, if Blackmagic decides they want to give me one, that's awesome. That'd be cool. Now, for me saying that I want one, for me saying that it was going to fit the workflow of things that I do outside of YouTube, that's absolutely true, and I think that's something that's not going to change anytime soon. I still want to work on set while at the same time make content. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do it. If you're somebody that's not ready for a bigger, heavier camera, you're not hiring crew, you're not producing and making shot lists and working slower and going through all of that workflow, and if you have no intention of going through all that workflow, don't get it. And if you're someone that wants to try things out for yourself, I think this is a great camera that you could rent, try out, have on a set, have on a film, have on a commercial, and make your decisions from there. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that this is probably the closest you're going to get to a full-frame RE camera, except it's going to be a lot cheaper. But at the same time, you have to do with some of the caveat type of things, which can be a little bit annoying. But keep in mind, if you do get the body-only option, you do get CF Express Type B modules, so that way transfer is a little bit easier, which was kind of the only thing that I had a problem with. That being said, I didn't want to go into a super spec review of this. I don't know a lot of things about the specs on here. I don't know every single frame rate that's in this camera, but I did use it in a professional shoot. I did test it a bunch, and I wanted to give that information back to you guys. That being said, if you guys like this video, I suggest you click a video over here because there's probably another one, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.